So direct democracy, the progressives, really saw these three tools of direct democracy as allowing the voters to bypass a corrupt legislature. If you had officers that were doing things that were wrong or corrupt, the recall allows the voters to get rid of them, to fire them. Now, this only applies to California. So state offices, you can't recall a United States senator, you can't recall a congressman, you can't recall national, the president. But you can recall California officials at state and local levels. And really, most of the recalls that we've seen in California are local offices. Usually city council or school board officers are the ones who are going to get recalled. It's easy to collect signatures in a small district, to recall or to have the special election on the ballot. You have to collect some small percentage of the votes that were cast. The intention is to remove somebody, who shouldn't be there. Somebody who's committed a crime or lied to the voters, or, exhibiting unhinged or inappropriate behavior. There are two big exceptions are statewide recalls. In 2003, Governor Gray Davis was recalled. And just a year after he'd been elected in 2002, there was a statewide recall. In 2018, Senator Josh Newman was recalled for his vote on a gas tax, which was really kind of to take out the weakest Democrat. He had won by the smallest margin, and then the Republican Party really kind of coalesced against this idea that they could garner enough anger about one vote on a gas tax to fuel a recall, and it worked. It'll be sort of interesting to see what happens as a result, whether or not there'll be sort of retaliation. Will Democrats use the same technique to recall other Republicans, or, was that just an exception? The referendum. The referendum allows voters to veto legislation after it's been passed. So if the legislature, sort of is out of step with what the California voters want, the voters can put it on the ballot and vote to recall it. Prop 72, California legislature passed a healthcare law. The law basically required employers to provide health insurance policies for their employees, to pay at least 80% of the cost of the policies. And it started out with employers with more than 200 employees, but it clearly was going to go down to small businesses that had 20 or more employees. And so there was a lot of outrage about that. So restaurant owners joined with Walmart, raised millions of dollars to overturn the law and gather signatures. And they gathered enough signatures to qualify for the ballot. They had a big campaign, No on 72, to try to stop the healthcare tax. Unions stepped up to try to protect it. Obviously, they had worked hard with the legislature to get the healthcare legislation passed, and so they had millions on the yes on Prop 72. And the end result was that the no group won by a very small margin, but millions and millions and millions of dollars were spent. And ultimately, the referendum worked and vetoed the legislation, and so it never went into effect. The initiative is what we see far more often than the referendum. An initiative is just a proposal of a new law, kind of allowing the people to write their own legislation. The progressive movement was pretty successful with this one in the western states. 24 states in the country have some form of the initiative. Either the direct initiative, which is what we have, which, the signatures are gathered, the proposals placed on the ballot, and then the people vote. Or some states have an indirect initiative where the proposal goes to the legislature. Basically, the initiative process is advisory to the legislator, saying, hey, we really want you to fix let's see what's on a recent ballot. We don't like the size of cages for chickens in the state, so we want you to fix that. And then the legislature will pass a law based on that. And if it's good enough, if it does what the proponents want, it's solved with the legislature. If not, it goes to the ballot. There's some positive aspects to that the legislature then can fix things and have a little more depth and complexity to the legislation. Our initiative ends up with a lot of problems, including that we do ballot box budgeting, which means that we, the voters, are spending money, and we don't have to balance the budget, and we don't have to say where it comes from, and so our budget has really exploded, not just because of voters, but we're certainly part of the problem. We're really tough on crime. California is incredibly tough on crime, and so we've passed through the initiative process 3 strikes you're out. We've passed Jessica's law, which has GPS devices and monitoring of sexual offenders. 10/20 life, which adds 10 years for the commission of a crime with a gun, 20 years for the second offense, and life with the third offense. There's really a sense with initiatives that we want something for nothing. Between 1988 and 2008, there were, 250 some initiatives that kind of offered something for nothing, which means that the initiative increased spending without offsetting funds. So it's just an initiative that says the legislature will spend X number of dollars and get this. And we spend, we raise taxes on cigarettes to pay for mental health programs. We want after-school programs with $500 million being spent. But the voters themselves don't have to balance the budget. We don't have to account for that. So, yes, I want after-school funding, and I don't have to cut funds somewhere else. The legislature ends up having to do that. We vote for bonds, which, are taking out massive 30-year loans, which will double the cost of the project, but it seems like free money. Do I want to spend, billions of dollars on infrastructure? Yes, I do. I want infrastructure. And it's tough to get somewhere else. So we have all of these bond obligations. We also like special funds. We like, tax millionaires an extra 1% of their income to pay for mental health programs, pass motor vehicle fees to pay for roads, pass tobacco taxes to pay for early childhood programs. That's on some level, I understand, like, okay, we want to tax this group to pay for this, but I also think, if we want roads and we want mental health programs and we want early childhood programs, maybe we should all just pay a little more in taxes and not have all these special funds of this goes to this and that goes to that. And it ends up with these kind of weird counterintuitive incentives that really we want more people to smoke, because then there'll be more money for early childhood programs. And if, ironically, fewer people smoke, then we have less money for that. It's what we saw with the gas tax, which is that we have more energy efficient vehicles. And so we are buying less gasoline overall, but that means that there's less money for maintenance of roads and infrastructures. And so bridges are falling down in the state because we haven't fixed them. So maybe we should just all pay more. Here's one major problem. Only an initiative can change an initiative. And so when there's a problem, and often they're poorly written, often they're written by the people in, kind of a committee, or maybe there's a consultant, but it's not vetted by the legislature. There's no groups that can say, hey, this is going to be a real problem. And legislation is complicated because you have to pass the initiative that's on the ballot. So a lot of times there'll be an initiative where I like the overall idea of the initiative. I just hate the implementation. I don't like this iteration of it. And you have to pass the initiative that you're faced with. You don't get to pass some other version of it. And when there's a problem, you can only change it with another initiative, which really, that's one of the reasons the indirect initiative is really better, because the legislature gets like, okay, you want us to fix this problem, we're going to go fix it. And then we can change it at any time when there are unintended consequences. But California passed the 3 strikes law. And there's a video you can watch that kind of talks about the problems. In 1994, it sounded like a really good idea. The idea that somebody who's committed 3 felonies should be locked in prison for the rest of their life. However, we didn't specify that the 3rd strike had to be serious or violent. And so you end up with people who, stole a loaf of bread, or one guy stole a piece of pizza while he was on probation, and that's a felony probation violation because he stole, and so he ends up in jail for the rest of his life. Well, that's not what we meant. But it took 18 years to get an initiative, and we tried variations of it to fix it, but 18 years it took for finally a reform to qualify for the ballot and be passed to fix that and to say that these felonies have to be serious and violent. There's one guy that got locked away because he stole baby socks, and he was interviewed. He's like, my girlfriend took me to the mall. She wanted to go shopping, and I was bored, and so I stole some baby socks, and I got caught, and I got sent to prison for the rest of my life. And even if you think, okay, well, that's, a guy who can't follow society's rules, and he's going to end up in prison anyway, at least from the perspective of fiscal responsibility, $70,000 a year that we're paying to keep people in prison, I want something more serious than stealing $5 worth of baby socks. The other problem is that voters don't have to balance the budget. So we're not faced with the problem that the legislature is faced with. California, in 2002 had a $20 billion deficit. And there was a proposition that, ironically, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who, then the next year becomes governor, but he was promoting this, and he was saying this is a really great idea. And it is a really great idea. Before and after school programs should absolutely be funded. But Proposition 49 was proposing that we spend $500 million on after-school programs. At the same time, we had a $20 billion deficit. And so, I'm sort of screaming from the rooftops, like, we can't afford this. And where do you think they're going to cut to get the $500 million? So, yes, I want after-school programs. Yes, I think those are important. But not if they're going to cut the school day. Not if we're going to have furloughs. Not if there's going to be, less money for the music teacher to teach during the regular day, and yet the voters, passed it by 57%. So that's really frustrating, because I feel like the voters are sometimes really short-sighted in saying, yeah, that's a good idea. Well, it is, but, it sort of takes me back to the high school ASB races where, some student is promising pizza and ice cream in the rally on Fridays. And it's like, well, there's no money for that, so that's not going to happen. We also only vote on these on the general elections. So for a long time, we would vote in the primary. And so there was kind of a forum shopping where you would say, this is going to appeal to conservative voters, so I want to have this in a low turnout election where it's more likely to be voted on, or, I want it to be on the general election because that'll increase the chances of it passing. So now it's only general election. It lengthens the ballot a lot, but also means that the greatest number of voters will vote on it. There's an increased filing fee. Jerry Brown was $200, since 1943. And now it's gone up to $2,000.